one knows for sure why this phenomenon exists, or how it works. It is one of the moon's many mysteries. Until very recently, the moon remained an enigma. And it was this mysterious quality which fueled our fascination. Where did it come from? What was it made of? And the biggest question of all, was it a world like ours? Did it harbor life? For millennia, it was impossible to know. No one even knew what the surface of the moon looked like. All that changed in 1608, when an Italian astronomer made a primitive telescope. For the first time, he was able to get a close-up look at the moon. His name was Galileo Galilei, and what he saw shattered conventional wisdom. At the time, the Church insisted that all heavenly bodies were perfect, unblemished spheres, and that the Earth was the only body in the universe that was flawed. But Galileo's close-up view of the moon's surface revealed a world that was far from perfect. He described it as rough and uneven, just like the surface of Earth itself. Perhaps it was a living world like our own. Hundreds of years later, our knowledge of the moon had barely improved. Just how ignorant we were was revealed in 1835. An American newspaper published a front-page story announcing that herds of bison had been observed tramping across the lunar surface. Readers were entranced by this vision. A few days later, it was revealed to be an elaborate hoax. The only way to find out what was really on the moon was to go there and take a look. But over 100 years later, it still seemed an impossible dream. All that finally changed in the early 1960s.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Kennedy's bid for the moon came out of a Cold War battle to win over people's hearts and minds. It was an inspired move, tapping into an ancient dream. Finally, we would find the answers to the moon's great mysteries. How was it formed? What was it made of? And was it a home for some form of life?
The moon has sort of always been the symbol of the remote and the unreachable. And here people are going to leave Earth and go to the moon.
But if they wanted to lay claim to the moon, the Americans had a lot of catching up to do. Their Cold War rival, the Soviet Union, was way ahead. The Russians' ambitious space program produced a string of firsts, including the first satellite in orbit and the first man in space. And in 1959, they'd set out to solve one of the moon's greatest mysteries, something that had kept humans guessing for centuries. What was on the far side of the moon, the side that always faces away from us? To find out, the Russian mission would have to circle the moon for the first time. On the 7th of October, the probe disappeared behind the far side of the moon, and its cameras leapt into action. For 40 minutes, it snapped away while scientists waited on tenterhooks. When the images were transmitted back to Earth, they had their answer. The far side was actually just the same as the near side. But the lack of surprises didn't matter. These blurred images made history, and the mission consolidated the Russians' lead in the space race. The Americans weren't keen on second place.
Because the American people alarmed that a foreign country, especially an enemy country, can do this. We fear this.
Definitely alarming.
Did you admire the Russians for doing it or not?
No, definitely not. I said we should have been the first ones to have it.
The Russians had all the headlines, but landing a man on the moon was an entirely new challenge. At the time when Kennedy made his famous speech, scientists knew so little about the moon that the prospect of sending a human there seemed almost reckless. Their knowledge of lunar geography was so sketchy, they didn't know where they could land safely. They didn't even know whether the moon's surface was strong enough to support the weight of a spacecraft, or even a man. They needed answers quickly. The first step for the Americans was a series of probes called Ranger. They carried onboard television cameras to take detailed close-up pictures of the lunar surface. But it wasn't exactly a sophisticated approach. The Rangers went in hard, crashing kamikaze style into the moon's surface, furiously filming away until the moment of destruction. The 4,300 images taken by the Ranger probes were the clearest views we'd ever had of our moon. It was now clear it was a harsh and hostile world. But the pictures were vital to prepare for the ultimate goal, the moon landing. It was an epic endeavor. No expense was spared. At its peak, the moon program employed more than 400,000 people in America and cost over $25 billion, nearly $150 billion in today's money.
People are electrified by the race to the moon. And, the United States was spending, I think it was 4.5% of our entire national budget on space. But most Americans were 100% in favor of let's push on and whatever it costs, let's get to the moon.
10, 9.
By 1968, NASA was ready for a test run.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Apollo 8 wouldn't actually land on the moon, but it would go into lunar orbit. Although they weren't going to touch down, this would be the first time that humans had ever visited another world.
This transmission is coming to you approximately halfway between the moon and the Earth.
Back on Earth, people watched and waited and listened, and the astronauts didn't disappoint. Hovering just above the moon's surface, their broadcast was from the book of Genesis.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
I don't know, it just caught the country by surprise. It was so moving and comforting, and I think at that point we realized the importance of a space mission for bringing self-confidence to people.
On their fourth orbit around the moon, the astronauts saw something that no human eyes had ever seen before. It was the Earth, rising out of the blackness of space. The pictures they took changed the way we viewed our planet forever.
We have liftoff.
And then came the big one. On July 16th, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched.
Oh, I remember watching it. It was like, wow. It was like watching science fiction come true.